Motion.
And before I move the motion, I want to welcome Ryan O'Connor, who's in the gallery here today, watching these proceedings, and I move officially the motion on behalf of Sinn Féin. The cost of living crisis continues to bear down on workers and families, and with the impact of inflation and rising cost, impacts everybody, but it doesn't impact everybody equally. With those on lower incomes, they suffer a greater reduction in living standards, given that they spend a greater proportion of their income on essentials such as energy and on food. And those essentials have seen the steepest rise in costs over the past year and more, and they're pushing households to the brink, Minister. Workers and families have stretched and they've managed their income to the last cent, but there comes a point for every single family where there's nothing left to cut, and that's what we're seeing today in many families right across the state. An increase in hardship, in financial difficulties and in poverty. Almost 600,000 people now live on incomes below the poverty line, and the latest report by Bernardo's needs to be a real wake-up call by government, and you shouldn't be second-guessing this report. These are people on the front line telling them what it's like in the real life, not in the ivory towers of where government ministers sometimes reside. And they found that parents who were surveyed here, that the number of parents using food banks had doubled to 10%. 1 in 10 parents having to use a food bank to feed their families. 1 in 5 parents didn't have enough food to feed their children at some point in the past year. And parents skipping meals to ensure that their kids were able to eat. Many of these parents are in work, earning their poverty, as it's now being called, Minister. An appalling picture of life for so many. Spiralling food prices are compounded by energy bills that are throwing household budgets into chaos. A report last year by the SRI found that 1 in 3 households were living in energy poverty. Behind these statistics are the grim choices that are faced by households day in, day out. Choices that they're forced to make, whether it's cutting back on food or turning the heating off. Over the past 2 years, the average gas bill has increased by 140%. The average electricity price has increased by 115%. That's more than double for these households. For those on low and fixed incomes, these costs can simply not be absorbed. So something has to give. And we're witnessing a tale of two Irelands. Yesterday, the European Commission updated its growth forecast for this year, with economic growth here now expected to reach 4.9%. And this was celebrated by many, including government ministers. Some people really need to have a reality check, because they need to come down and recognise the challenges that people are facing in their daily lives. What is there to celebrate when a government cannot convert this economic growth into decent living standards for our people? That's the question that people ask. What does it tell us about the health of our society and the performance of this government when it celebrates high economic growth while the number of parents using food banks doubles? When households have been plunged into energy poverty, when every parent forced to use a food bank to feed their children is a failure not of these parents, but a failure of the state. Where every household that is forced to deprive themselves of the warmth in the winter months is a failure not of these households, but again a failure of the state. It is the clearest evidence that government have failed to tackle the cost of living crisis. That Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party are out of touch with the struggles of ordinary families that they face day in and day out, and action must be taken to address the hardships so many are suffering, to ease the pressure on them and to provide support. The state has the resources to do so, in order to protect the most vulnerable and support those on low and fixed incomes. So Sinn Féin are calling in this motion, and have been calling for payments of a spring bonus, a double payment for those relying on working-age social welfare payments, for pensioners, for people with disabilities, for carers and for lone parents, 1.3 million people. To extend the fuel allowance to those in receipt of working family payment in order to support working families on low incomes, and to establish a discretionary fund that would provide financial support to those experiencing utility debt. This package is not only doable, it would go a long way to supporting those who are suffering at the sharp edge of the cost of living crisis, and this needs to be part of a wider package of supports in terms of the cost of living. Any government serious about tackling financial hardship and poverty would support these proposals, and more so, they would implement them. So that is what we in Sinn Féin are calling on government to do, to bring forward the necessary cost of living measures that are required, and as part of those measures to incorporate a spring bonus, an extension of the fuel allowance, a discretionary fund and a number of other measures that we've identified. Gurmaigad.